It is the winter of 1285. 40,000 Mongol riders are pouring through the Carpathian Mountains into Hungary, the same kingdom they burned to ash 44 years ago, and they are riding into a trap built from stone and memory that will shatter the Golden Horde and end the Mongol advance into Europe forever. An old guard stands on a wall that did not exist when he was a boy. Fresh quarried limestone, cold beneath his boots, mortared into place by hands that remember digging graves more than laying stone. Below him, the Carpathian darkness breathes fog into the mountain passes. Through that fog, a sound. A low, rolling percussion. Rhythmic, growing louder with each heartbeat. Not thunder. Thunder does not carry rhythm. Thunder does not carry on its back a shrieking war cry from the far side of the world. Ura. The last time he heard that sound he was 7 years old. Barefoot. Screaming. His mother's hand clamped around his wrist like iron, dragging him into a cave while the sky behind them turned orange. He is 51 now. His hand is already reaching for the rope. His body remembered before his mind could catch up, because some sounds do not live in memory, they live in the bone. His fingers close around the frozen bell rope. Around him, sentries go rigid. Their breath hangs in small white ghosts that hover and die. Some of these men are old enough to remember 1241. They were children then. They remember the burning. They remember the silence that came after, the silence that was worse than any scream, when they crawled out of hiding and found their world emptied of everything alive. Every house hollow, every field black, every face they had ever loved, gone. They remember the wolves. The wolves came before the grass had time to cover the graves. And now, 44 years later, standing on walls their dead fathers never had, they hear those war cries rolling through the mountains like a debt the darkness has come to collect. The guard pulls the rope. The bell splits the frozen air like a blade through silk. Its iron voice carries outward, tower to tower, ridge to ridge, along a chain of fortifications that stretches across Hungary's eastern frontier like vertebrae along a spine of stone. Each bell wakes the next. Each tower answers. The alarm races across 50 miles of mountain and forest in minutes. In fortress after fortress, men rise from sleep. Crossbows are strung. Quivers are counted. Heavy gates grind shut on iron hinges. Torches flare to life on battlements that glow like teeth in the dark. An entire frontier shifts from sleep to war. Not in chaos, in sequence. As if the kingdom itself has drawn a single breath and held it. This is the sound Bela IV spent 28 years building toward. The sound of a kingdom that can hear its own heartbeat. The sound of a trap waiting to close. 44 years earlier, none of this existed. No bells, no towers, no stone chain, no spine. There was only open grassland stretching to the horizon. Wooden palisades that a strong wind could flatten. Scattered villages defended by prayers and pitchforks. A kingdom of wide plains and wider faith. Faith in God, faith in cavalry, faith that courage alone could stop whatever came out of the east. That faith died beside a river called the Sajo on an April morning in 1241. It died with 70,000 men. It died with 250,000 civilians in the months that followed. It died so completely that the chroniclers who survived could only call what they had witnessed the end of the world. What stands now in the place of that dead kingdom, what 40,000 Mongol riders are about to crash against, is something else. Something that does not run on faith. Something harder, colder, quieter. Built not from hope but from the specific memory of horror. Built from mass graves and ash and the sound of wolves in empty villages. Built from the absolute refusal to die the same way twice. And built by a man who is no longer alive to see whether his gamble will hold. King Bela IV has been 14 years in his grave. He will never see this night. He will never hear these bells. But every wall the guard stands on exists because of him. Every tower in the chain. Every crossbow bolt on every battlement. Every stone fortress perched on every hilltop across the kingdom. More than 100 of them, raised in a single generation by a king who understood that the Mongols would return and that when they did, only stone would save his people. He is the ghost in the mortar. The architect of the trap. The dead hand that is about to close around the throat of the Golden Horde. But here is the part no one tells you. This is not a battle story. This is a resurrection story. It is the story of a king who stood in the ashes of the worst catastrophe his nation had ever suffered, Fields burned black from horizon to horizon, rivers choked with corpses, whole regions emptied of human life so completely that only wolves remained, and instead of breaking, he saw something inside the wreckage. A lesson, hidden in plain sight, so simple you could carve it into a single block of limestone. Stone holds, everything else burns. He spent the last 28 years of his life turning those 5 words into a fortress state. He reversed centuries of royal policy. He sacrificed his own power, deliberately, with open eyes, because he understood a truth most rulers never face. A king who rules ashes rules nothing at all. So he handed his nobles the tools of his own undoing. He begged them to build castles. He reformed his armies. He imported crossbowmen and military orders from across Europe. He designed a layered defense built from the ground up to neutralize every Mongol strength. Their speed, their deception, their ability to destroy field armies in open battle. And now, on a frozen night in 1285, with war cries echoing through the Carpathian passes for the first time in 44 years, that system is about to be tested. The greatest military machine in human history against the walls of a kingdom that refused to stay dead. 40,000 riders against stone. Speed against patience. The old darkness against a new defense it has never faced. If you have never heard this story, if you believe the Mongol Empire was unstoppable, what you are about to learn will change everything you think you know. Not theory. Stone. Blood. The cold arithmetic of a nation that weaponized its own worst memory. Hit that like button now. Stay with this one. Because it earns every second. But to understand what those walls truly mean, to feel the full weight of what Hungary became between one invasion and the next, you first have to descend into the catastrophe that made the transformation necessary. You have to go back 44 years, to April of 1241, to a muddy riverbank near a town called Mohi. To the morning when 70,000 men died in a trap of a very different kind, not stone but geometry, and a kingdom learned in a single sunrise that everything it believed about war was a lie. King Balafor was not a fool. History sometimes paints him as one, the king who lost everything, but that portrait is drawn by people who do not understand what he faced. He was a strong ruler. He had consolidated royal authority. He commanded the most powerful kingdom in Central Europe. And he took the Mongol threat seriously. When a Dominican friar named Julianus returned from the eastern steppes carrying a letter from Bada Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan himself, demanding the unconditional surrender of Hungary, Bela did not laugh. He read it. He strengthened his borders. He ordered miles of frontier barriers built along the eastern passes, dense tangles of felled trees and brush that took months of labor and enormous expense to construct. He accepted tens of thousands of Cuman refugees fleeing westward with stories of Mongol slaughter that sounded like the end of the world. He prepared. By every standard his era understood, he prepared well. But every standard his era understood was irrelevant, because nothing in European experience, nothing in the entire history of Western warfare, had ever encountered what was coming through those passes. The Mongols cleared his frontier barriers in 3 days. 3 days. Months of labor. Mountains of felled timber. Erased in 72 hours. Remember that number. It matters later. They came not as a single army but as 5 coordinated columns. Each one a needle threading a different gap in Hungary's border. Each moving faster than any messenger could carry warning. Each Mongol warrior rode with strings of spare horses, 3, 4, sometimes 5 rotating mounts so the column never slowed. Never rested. Never gave the defenders time to think, to regroup, to understand what was happening before the next blow fell. Hungarian forces scattered across the kingdom tried to intercept them. Every attempt ended the same way. Archbishop Ugrin Sak led a strong detachment against what he believed was an isolated Mongol unit. The Mongols fled. The archbishop, tasting blood, ordered his heavy cavalry to pursue. The pursuit led into a swamp. European war horses, armored, massive, magnificent, sank to their bellies in muck. They could not move. They could not charge. They could barely breathe. The Mongol horse archers wheeled around and killed them from distances the trapped knights could not close. Arrow after arrow. From every direction. For as long as it took. The archbishop escaped with his life and his first real lesson. This enemy did not fight by any rules Christendom had ever known. But that lesson came too late. Far, far too late. By early April, Bela had gathered the main Hungarian army, perhaps 80,000 men, near the Sejo River at a place called Mohi. It was the largest force he could assemble. Knights, cavalry, infantry. The military strength of an entire kingdom, concentrated in one camp on the western bank of the river. They held the only significant bridge. On the night of April 10th, a small Mongol force tested the crossing. Hungarian crossbowmen drove them back. The casualties were real. Mongol blood stained the bridge planks. The Hungarian camp erupted in celebration. Wine flowed. Songs rose into the dark sky. Men slapped each other's backs and praised God. They had beaten the Mongols. The terror from the east could bleed and die like anything else. They were dead wrong. Every arrow the Mongols spent on that bridge was an investment. Not in crossing. In making the Hungarians feel safe. In making them drink. In making them sleep deep and dream of victory while the real blow was already in motion. Because while Bela's army celebrated, an old man on a tired horse was already moving through the darkness. Subutai, 70 years old. A warrior who had campaigned from Korea to Poland. The most dangerous military mind alive. While the Hungarians drank their wine and sang their songs, Subutai found a ford miles upstream. Through the black hours of the night, thousands of Mongol cavalry crossed the Sejo in silence. No torches, no drums, no sound but hooves on wet stone and the whisper of a river that did not care what crossed it. By the time the first gray light touched the sky on April 11th, Subutai's force was in position, behind the Hungarian camp. The trap was set. And this trap was not made of stone. Dawn came with thunder. Batakan's renewed assault on the bridge opened with a new horror. Catapults hurling projectiles that exploded with shattering force, fire and smoke and a sound like the sky cracking open. Gunpowder. The Hungarians had never seen it. Never heard it. Never felt the way it broke nerve and reason and turned brave men into trembling animals. But the bridge assault was the performance. The real blow came from behind. Subutai's flanking force struck the Hungarian rear like a door swinging shut on a tomb. And the camp became a cage. Tents had been pitched too close together. Wagons circled in a defensive ring that now trapped the defenders inside their own walls. There was no room to form ranks. No space to mount a charge. No direction that did not face arrows. Horses screamed. Men trampled each other reaching for weapons they would never swing. Smoke from Bata's catapults rolled through the camp like a fog made of fear. And then, the Hungarians saw it. A gap. A corridor of open ground in the western side of the encirclement. A way out. Salvation. Men surged toward it. Thousands of them. Abandoning formation. Throwing down shields. Running with the blind desperation of animals fleeing a fire. It was not mercy. It was not a mistake. It was not a weakness in the Mongol line. It was geometry. Subutai had studied an ancient principle, a truth as old as hunting itself. A cornered animal fights with the fury of the damned. But a running animal dies easy. The gap was deliberate. The corridor was a killing funnel. Mongol light cavalry rode parallel to the fleeing columns on both sides and shot them down. Methodically. Man by man. Mile after mile. With the patience of wolves culling a herd across open steppe. The flight stretched for 30 miles. The dead stretched with it. By nightfall, between 60 and 70,000 Hungarians lay dead across the plain. Archbishop Ugrin Sak, the man who had survived the swamp, did not survive Mohi. Duke Kalman, the king's own brother, took wounds that would kill him within days. Bela himself escaped on a half-dead horse, riding south and west while Mongol pursuit parties hunted him across his own kingdom like hounds coursing a stag. But the battle was only the beginning. What followed was a year the Hungarian chronicles remember simply as the devastation. And it was worse than Mohi. Far worse. The Mongol army, unopposed now by any meaningful force, spread across the kingdom like acid across skin. They burned pest. They swept the great Hungarian plain from east to west with the thoroughness of men following orders, not impulses. This was not the frenzy of a wild horde. This was systematic. Calculated. Almost administrative. Villages burned. Farms were scraped to bare earth. Mills were demolished stone by stone. Bridges were dropped into rivers. Wells were poisoned. Livestock was slaughtered in the fields. Seed grain, the future itself, was consumed or scattered into mud. Monasteries that had stood for centuries were emptied and set alight. Their inhabitants, monks, scholars, keepers of knowledge stretching back generations, were put to the sword with the same cold indifference applied to sheep. Between a quarter and a third of Hungary's entire population perished. 250,000 souls. Perhaps 500,000. No one will ever know the true number, because the people who could have counted were dead. Entire regions were emptied of human life so completely that wolves denayed in the shells of abandoned houses. The great Hungarian plain, the richest farmland in Central Europe, looked, in the words of one surviving witness, like a desert made by the hand of God's enemy. Ask yourself this: if you survived something like this, if you crawled out of hiding to find a quarter of your people dead and your kingdom turned to ash, what would you build from the wreckage? What could you possibly build? Because here is the detail that changes everything. The hidden truth buried inside the catastrophe that nobody talks about. Amid this ocean of death, amid the ash and the silence and the wolves, something survived. The stone castles held. Every single one. Hungary possessed perhaps a dozen significant stone fortifications in 1241. They were few. They were scattered. They had not been built to stop the Mongols. Most of them guarded the western border against the Holy Roman Empire. And every single one survived. At Esztergom, the Mongols brought 30 siege engines. 30. The same machines that had cracked the walls of Beijing. The same arsenal that had broken the fortresses of Persia and the cities of the Jin dynasty. They hammered the stone walls with everything they possessed. Stone against stone. Day after day. The walls absorbed the impacts like cliffs absorbing waves. When bombardment failed, Bata Khan sent his finest warriors, his personal elite, his Batars, to storm the walls by force. 30 of them died on the approaches, cut down by crossbow bolts fired from the battlements by men who could aim from cover and reload behind stone. 30 of the best fighters in the Mongol Empire, killed by defenders they could not reach, behind walls they could not break. At the Croatian fortress of Klis, the Mongols hurled stones at the walls until their catapult arms cracked. The stones bounced off like pebbles thrown at a mountainside. After days of futile assault, the invaders simply rode on. They had no answer. The greatest war machine in human history had no answer for properly cut stone, properly laid, properly defended by men who understood that their lives depended on every mortar joint. It was a small truth, almost invisible against the vastness of the killing. A whisper inside a scream. 12 fortresses standing in a kingdom of ashes. Who would even notice? Someone noticed. Someone filed that truth away in the deepest part of his mind. The place where survival instincts live alongside the memory of mass graves and the sound of his own people screaming. Bela foresaw the lesson the dead had paid for. And he swore he would build his kingdom's future on it. But first the Mongols had to leave. And the reason they left is one of history's strangest turns. In March of 1242, word reached Bata Khan that the great Khan Ogdi, supreme ruler of the entire Mongol Empire, had died in distant Mongolia. Mongol succession law demanded that every prince of the blood return for the Kurultai, the great assembly that would choose a new supreme leader. The armies turned east. They rode away. Not because they were beaten. Not because Hungary had resisted. Because politics called them home. They left behind a kingdom so shattered that survival itself seemed closer to miracle than strategy. Bela IV returned from his refuge on the Adriatic coast. He came back to a land he barely recognized. Contemporary accounts say he wept openly when he saw what remained of his capital. A Dominican friar named Master Roger, who had survived the occupation by hiding in forests and surviving on roots, composed a work he titled Carmen Miserabile, the Song of Misery. It was not drama. It was not literary exaggeration. It was the simplest, most honest title he could find for what he had seen with his own eyes. Bela stood in the ashes of everything his dynasty had built across 2.5 centuries. Everything. Gone. And he faced the question that separates kings from legends. What now? He could have spent his remaining years in simple recovery. Reburying the dead. Replanting the fields. Repopulating the empty villages. That task alone was staggering enough to fill an entire reign. Most rulers would have chosen that path. Most rulers would have rebuilt what was lost, brick by brick, and counted themselves blessed if they managed even that much before they died. Bela did not choose recovery. He chose reinvention. He looked at the ruins of his kingdom and saw not a disaster to be repaired, but a blueprint to be redrawn. He saw the truth the catastrophe had carved into the landscape itself, the truth written in the standing walls of Esztergom and Klis while everything around them lay in ashes. Stone holds. Everything else burns. And a kingdom can be rebuilt to make that truth its foundation. He understood, with the terrible clarity of a man who has lost everything, that the Mongols would return. Their withdrawal was political, not military. They had left because a Khan died, not because Hungary had beaten them. When their politics were settled, when the succession was resolved, when the empire's attention turned westward again, they would come back. And when they came back, the same open grasslands and the same wooden walls and the same cavalry charges would produce the same rivers of blood. Unless Hungary became something the Mongols had never faced before. Not a kingdom of open plains. A kingdom of stone. A kingdom that forced the Mongols to fight the one kind of war they could not win. What Bela did next required a kind of courage more profound than any battlefield valor, because it demanded that he destroy the very foundation of his own royal power. And the hidden cost of that sacrifice would not reveal itself for decades. But that story begins with the most radical gamble any medieval king ever made. A king about to hand his own nobles the weapons they would one day turn against his throne. Because he understood something that echoes across every century since. A king who rules ashes rules nothing at all. A king who rules ashes rules nothing at all. Bela IV stands in the wreckage of his kingdom in the spring of 1242 and he does not rebuild. Not yet. He thinks. He walks through the silence of depopulated villages. He counts the standing structures in a landscape of ruin. He sends riders to every corner of Hungary with a single question. What survived? The answers come back. Wooden palisades, gone. Open towns, gone. Farms, mills, bridges, monasteries, gone. Cavalry formations, field armies, the entire military apparatus of the kingdom, gone. Stone castles standing. Every single one. Bela does not need the answers repeated. He memorizes them once. He carries them in his chest like a second heartbeat. And from those answers he draws a conclusion so radical that it will take him 28 years to execute. A conclusion that will demand he sacrifice the very thing that makes him king. For 2.5 centuries, the Hungarian crown has maintained an absolute monopoly on castle construction. Only the king can authorize stone fortifications. Only the king can permit walls thick enough to withstand siege. The logic is ancient and sound. A nobleman with a stone castle is a nobleman who can defy the throne. Strong walls breed strong rivals. Centralized power depends on ensuring that no subject, no matter how loyal today, can build a fortress capable of resisting royal authority tomorrow. This policy has kept the Arpad dynasty supreme for 10 generations. Bela is about to tear it apart with his own hands. He begins issuing decrees in 1242. Not tentative suggestions. Not cautious permissions. Commands. Please. Incentives so generous they border on desperation. He offers his nobles tax exemptions if they build in stone. He grants them new lands, new titles, new political privileges. He writes letters. He sends envoys. He does everything short of laying the foundation stones himself. Build. Build now. Build in stone. Build on every hilltop, every river bluff, every mountain pass, every crossroads that a Mongol column might one day ride through. Build as if your life depends on it, because it does. And mine does. And your children's lives and their children's lives, and the life of everything we have left. He is handing his magnates the weapons of rebellion. He knows this. He calculates the cost with open eyes and a mind unclouded by sentiment. A throne threatened by ambitious nobles is a problem for the future. A throne consumed by Mongol fire is a problem with no future at all. He makes the trade. And the stone begins to rise. Here is what most people do not grasp. What makes military historians stare at the numbers and shake their heads. The scale of what Bela builds is not incremental. It is volcanic. In the first decade after the invasion, 44 new stone castles rise across Hungary. Not wooden watchtowers. Not earth and timber forts. Stone. Quarried from hillsides. Hauled by ox cart over roads that barely exist to commanding heights chosen by men who have studied exactly how the Mongols move. Shaped by masons recruited from Germany, Italy, France. Specialists imported at enormous expense because Hungary does not have enough skilled stoneworkers to meet the demand. Mortared into walls 8 feet thick. 10 feet thick. Thick enough that the catapult stones which cracked Beijing and broke Persia will bounce off them like pebbles thrown at a cliff face. By the time Bela dies in 1270, the number approaches 100. 100 stone fortifications. In a single generation. In a kingdom that had been burned to bare earth. Each castle perches on a height chosen for maximum defensive advantage. Each one commands a pass, a river crossing, a valley approach, a road junction. Each one is visible to at least one neighbor. Fire signals can leap from tower to tower. Bell chains can carry warnings across 50 miles in minutes. What Bela is building is not a collection of individual strongpoints. It is a system. A web. A network of interlocking positions that transforms the Hungarian landscape into something no invading army has ever faced. A labyrinth. Made of limestone and will. Visegrad rises between 1246 and 1259 on a commanding height above the Great Bend of the Danube. Bela finances it with the dowry of his wife, Queen Maria Lascarina. He spends his queen's personal fortune on a fortress because he considers stone walls more valuable than any luxury that money could otherwise buy. Buda Castle replaces Esztergom as the seat of royal power, chosen not for grandeur but for the defensive supremacy of Castle Hill above the Danube. Bela reimagines it as a fortress city, a final redoubt where the kingdom can survive even if everything beyond the walls is lost. Across the country, from the northeastern Carpathian passes to the Transdanubian hills, from the Croatian highlands to the Transylvanian plateau, stone towers rise against the sky like teeth in a closing jaw. Each one a monument to memory. Each one an act of defiance against a future that Bela can feel approaching like weather on the horizon. But walls without warriors are tombs. And Bela knows this too. He reforms the military with the same ruthless clarity he brings to everything. The light cavalry that formed the backbone of Hungarian armies before 1241 proved worse than useless against the Mongols. You cannot outride the greatest horsemen in the world. You cannot outshoot the finest mounted archers ever trained. Trying is not bravery. It is suicide with extra steps. Bela shifts resources toward heavy cavalry. Armored knights on armored horses. Men and mounts encased in steel and leather who can hold ground, anchor a defensive line, and fight at close quarters where Mongol speed and mobility count for nothing. In the open steppe, the Mongol horse archer is supreme. Inside the killing zone of a castle's approaches, where crossbow bolts rain from above and the ground is broken by ditches and stakes, heavy cavalry becomes a hammer that pins the attacker against the anvil of stone. He recruits crossbowmen from Venice and the Italian city-states. Professionals. Men who have spent lifetimes mastering the weapon that proved deadliest against Mongol attackers at Esztergom and Klis. A trained crossbowman behind a stone parapet can reload under cover, aim through an arrow slit, and drive a bolt through Mongol leather armor at 100 paces. One man behind stone is worth 20 in an open field. Bela understands this mathematics with the precision of a man whose kingdom was destroyed by bad arithmetic, and he is rewriting every equation. He invites the Knights Hospitaller to establish themselves in Hungary. He welcomes other military orders. He is importing not just soldiers but entire institutions of martial knowledge. Training systems, command structures, siege defense doctrines developed over generations of warfare in the Holy Land. Knowledge that cannot be bought with gold alone. Knowledge that requires relationships, concessions, grants of land and autonomy. Every concession weakens the crown. Every grant strengthens a subject. Bela pays every price without flinching. If this is reshaping what you thought you knew about the Mongol Empire, if you are starting to see that the real story is not the invasion but the transformation, drop a comment and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Because what happens when the Mongols actually hit this system is something military history has never properly reckoned with. Now, castles and crossbows and heavy knights are the skeleton. But a skeleton without flesh is a corpse. And the flesh of a kingdom is its people. Dead farmers pay no taxes. Empty land grows no grain. Abandoned towns produce no trade revenue. And armies, even armies behind stone walls, cannot fight without food, without iron, without the 1,000 material necessities that only a functioning economy can provide. Bela launches a colonization campaign so aggressive it has few parallels in medieval history. He sends agents across Christendom. He offers terms so generous they sound desperate, because they are. Free land, tax holidays, urban privileges, self-governance, legal protections. Thousands come. Germans, Poles, Italians, settlers from every corner of Europe. They bring new agricultural techniques, new crafts, New skills. They plant vineyards on hillsides that have been wild since the invasion. They establish towns on land that wolves had claimed. They build houses in villages where the only previous residents were ghosts and grass. Bela grants urban charters to settlements that agree to maintain walls and organize militia forces. Every fortified town becomes another node in the defensive web. Every armed citizen becomes another fighter who does not need to be paid from the royal treasury. The kingdom grows stronger from the ground up, not through royal decree alone, but through the accumulated labor of tens of thousands of ordinary people who chose to build their lives inside a fortress state because the terms were good and the walls were thick. Mining expands. Metallurgy advances. Iron production rises. The economy that funds the military machine grows alongside the machine itself. Within a generation, many of the worst devastated regions have recovered their pre-invasion populations. Some have exceeded them. 28 years of this. 28 years of quarrying, hauling, mortaring, recruiting, resettling, reforming. 28 years of a king pouring every resource, every favor, every ounce of royal authority into a single obsessive purpose, ensuring that his kingdom can survive the day the Mongols return. Bela IV dies in 1270. The chroniclers name him the second founder of Hungary. They place his achievement alongside that of Saint Stephen, who established the kingdom itself in the year 1000. It is not flattery. In some ways, what Bela accomplished is more extraordinary than original creation, because he built from ruins while an existential threat breathed on his neck. He planted forests he would never walk beneath. He raised walls he would never defend. He bet everything on a future he would never witness. He dies not knowing if his gamble will pay. But here is where the story takes a turn that makes his sacrifice even more remarkable, because the kingdom he so carefully rebuilt begins to crack from within. His son Stephen V reigns only 2 years before dying. The throne passes to his grandson, Ladislaus IV, a boy of 10 with a Hungarian father and a Cuman mother. And from the moment the crown touches his head, the fault lines multiply. Ladislaus grows into a young man who gravitates toward his mother's nomadic heritage rather than the Christian court that surrounds him. He wears Cuman dress. He takes Cuman companions. He neglects his Christian wife until the Archbishop of Esztergom threatens what amounts to holy war against his own sovereign. The boy king has inherited a fortress state and seems determined to let it rot from the inside. Nobles feud. The church thunders. The Cumans, the very refugees Bela had welcomed as settlers and auxiliary cavalry, rebel in 1282. Ladislaus crushes them at Lake Hoard with enough military competence to prove he is not useless. But the political fractures deepen. By the mid-1280s, Hungary looks, to outside eyes, like a kingdom devouring itself. Divided, leaderless in spirit, ripe for the taking. And someone is watching. Nogai, warlord of the Golden Horde, the most dangerous man in Eastern Europe. He has defeated Byzantine armies. He has made and unmade Khans. He controls the western fragment of Genghis Khan's shattered empire with an iron grip and an appetite for conquest that grows with every victory. Cuman refugees from Ladislaus' suppression have fled into Nogai's territory. They tell him everything. The feuding nobles. The excommunicated king. The kingdom tearing itself apart at the seams. They paint a portrait of weakness so vivid that Nogai can practically smell the vulnerability. He looks at the intelligence and sees the same vulnerable prey Batid Khan devoured 44 years earlier. Same kingdom. Same divisions. Same open door. He decides to finish the work his predecessor began. But Nogai is reading the politics. He is not reading the walls. He is studying the cracks in the court and missing the stone in the mountains. He sees a weak king and assumes a weak kingdom. He sees noble factions at each other's throats and concludes that no unified defense is possible. He is wrong. Because the genius of what Bela built is that it does not require a strong king. It does not require unity. It does not require a single brilliant commander to hold everything together. The system works precisely because it is decentralized, because every baron defends his own castle, every garrison holds its own walls, every local commander fights for his own soil with his own crossbowmen behind his own stone. The system is designed to win without a genius at the top. Nogai does not know this. He cannot know this, because no one in the history of the world has ever built anything like it. In the winter of 1285 he gives the order. 2 armies. 2 routes. The same Carpathian passes Bata rode through in triumph 44 years ago. Talabuga will take the northern force through the Varek Pass. Nogai himself will drive the southern column through Transylvania. Classical Mongol doctrine. Ravage the countryside. Draw out the defenders. Destroy them through superior mobility. Converge on the capital. Dictate terms to whatever remains. They expect wooden palisades and open plains. They expect a massed army riding out to meet them in the kind of decisive pitched battle that the Mongols have been winning since the days of Genghis on the steppe. 40,000 riders cross the border. Confident. Hungry. Certain of victory. They are about to find out what Bela IV spent 28 years building. They are about to ride into a dead king's trap, and discover that the kingdom they destroyed in 1241 no longer exists. In its place stands something harder. Something colder. Something that does not need a strong king or a united court or a single brilliant general. Something that needs only stone, and patience, and the memory of what happens to a people who are caught without walls. The greatest military machine in human history is about to collide with quarried limestone and the stubbornness of people who have decided, collectively, generationally, in their very bones, that they will never be victims again. They find stone. Talabuga's northern army is the first to understand. His columns push through the Varek Pass, the same gap in the Carpathians that Batakhan rode through in glory 44 years ago, and they descend into a kingdom that does not exist in any Mongol intelligence report. Because the kingdom described in those reports died in 1241. What waits on the other side of the mountains is its replacement. The first town they approach presents walls of quarried limestone. Not wood. Not earth. Stone. Cut and dressed and mortared by men who knew this day would come. They ride to the next crossroads. A castle on a hill. Arrow slits staring down like narrow eyes. Crossbow bolts already loaded behind them. They push further west. A river ford. A tower overlooking it. More crossbowmen. More stone. Every road. Every crossing. Every valley approach. Stone. 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 The landscape has teeth. Talabuga is not a fool. He is a Mongol prince with decades of warfare behind him. He has a plan. The plan is the same plan that has worked from China to Persia to Russia to Hungary itself. Identify the strongest point, bypass it, ravage the countryside until the defenders are forced to concentrate their army in the open field, then destroy that army with superior mobility and the killing geometry of encirclement. The plan requires the defenders to come out from behind their walls. The defenders do not come out. Talabuga brings his army against the fortress of Rijek. It perches on a height in the northeastern highlands, a fist of stone on a knuckle of rock, commanding the approaches below with the calm authority of something that knows it cannot be moved. He orders siege equipment forward. Catapults. The same class of weapons that cracked the walls of Khwarezmian cities and broke the fortresses of the Jin dynasty. Stones arc upward, hang for a heartbeat against the gray winter sky and fall. They strike the walls. They accomplish nothing. The walls are 8 feet thick. 10 in places. Built by masons who studied Mongol siege capability the way a doctor studies a disease, measuring its strength, calculating its limits, designing a defense calibrated to exceed the maximum force the enemy can deliver. The catapult stones hit the limestone and leave scars. Chips. Thus, the walls do not crack. The walls do not shift. The walls stand as if they have been there since the mountains formed. Days pass. Mongol casualties mount. Crossbow bolts fly from arrow slits with a flat, sharp crack that echoes off the surrounding hills. Each bolt is aimed. Each bolt finds flesh. The defenders reload behind cover, step back to the slit and fire again. One man behind stone killing 3 in the open. The mathematics Bela IV designed into every wall, working exactly as intended 14 years after his death. And then the hills come alive. Roland Borsa. Amadeus Aba. Georgi Baksa. Peter of Saras. These are not kings. They are not generals of a unified national army. They are local lords. Barons. Men who own the castles they defend and the land those castles command. Men who fight not for a distant crown but for the soil their children will inherit. They know every valley, every ridge, every game trail and goat path and hidden ford in mountains their families have held for generations. They lead mobile forces, heavy cavalry, crossbowmen, local militia, out of fortified bases and into the hills around Talabuga's stalled army. They attack Mongol foraging parties at dawn and vanish into the forest before the counterattack can form. They ambush supply columns in narrow defile where 10 men can hold off 100. They strike at the horse herds, the living fuel of the entire Mongol war machine, and drive them into ravines where they scatter and die. When Mongol pursuit forces give chase, the Hungarians fall back. Not in panic. In design. They retreat behind their own stone walls and shut the gates and wait. The Mongols arrive at the base of another castle on another hilltop and face another set of walls they cannot breach. They spend men. They spend time. They spend the one resource no army carries enough of, momentum. And every day they spend grinding against stone is a day their horses grow weaker. Because winter is not neutral. The Mongols chose the season deliberately. Frozen rivers make crossings easy. Hard ground aids cavalry movement. On the open steppe, winter is a Mongol ally. But this is not the steppe. This is the Carpathian mountain country in the dead of January. Snow piles waist-deep in the passes. Ice storms lash exposed cavalry formations with a fury that turns leather armor into frozen shells on frozen men. The hardy steppe ponies, bred to survive the Mongolian winter by pawing through thin snow cover to reach the grass beneath, find the ground frozen iron hard. The snow is too deep. The grass is too far down. There is no grazing. Fodder must be carried. Grain must be hauled in wagons through mountain roads that are barely passable in summer and lethal in winter. And the Hungarian guerrilla forces target supply trains with the focused aggression of men who understand exactly what happens to a mounted army that cannot feed its horses. Horses begin to die. Not in battle. In the cold. In the snow. In the slow arithmetic of starvation that no amount of Mongol courage can overcome. One horse dead means one rider on foot. A Mongol warrior on foot is a Mongol warrior stripped of everything that makes him dangerous. His speed. His mobility. His ability to strike and withdraw. His identity. Without horses, the Mongol military system is a body without blood. And the blood is draining. But here is the part that reveals the true genius of what Bela built. The detail that separates this defense from anything else in medieval history. There is no center. There is no single army for the Mongols to find and destroy. No capital whose fall ends the war. No king whose capture collapses the resistance. There is only the network. Castle supporting castle. Garrison reinforcing garrison. Local lord covering local lord. A web that can lose individual threads and keep holding. Cut one strand and the strands on either side pull tighter. The Mongols have spent a century perfecting the art of destroying armies. They draw them out. They encircle them. They create killing funnels and golden bridges and all the lethal geometries Subutai mastered at Mohi. But every one of those tactics requires the enemy to concentrate. To mass. To present a single target worthy of Mongol brilliance. Hungary in 1285 offers no such target. It offers only stone, patience, and the slow, grinding arithmetic of attrition that eats an invading army from the hooves up. The Sakeli make it worse. Far worse. These are the warrior communities settled in the Carpathian borderlands of Transylvania. Fierce. Independent. Rooted in these mountains the way trees are rooted, so deep you would have to tear the mountain apart to remove them. They know every defile, every hidden spring, every place where a ridge narrows to a knife edge and 10 men with bows can stop 1,000. They turn the terrain itself into a weapon. Felled trees block retreat paths. Rock slides crash down onto cavalry columns strung out along mountain roads. Arrows fly from slopes too steep to charge, fired by men who disappear into the forest before the shafts stop quivering in Mongol shields. The fortress of Tarako in Transylvania holds against multiple assaults. Each assault bleeds Talabuga's force of men, horses, and the one thing no commander can resupply from the rear, confidence. The warriors who entered Hungary certain of conquest are beginning to look over their shoulders. The army that has never been stopped is being stopped. Not by a grand battle. Not by a brilliant general. By stone and snow and the accumulated resistance of 1,000 small defiances that add up to something unbreakable. Nogai's southern army fares no better. Transylvania's mountain-ringed valleys become a killing maze. Nogai's forces take exactly one significant castle, the fortress at Bon Maikad, and the cost in men and time is so severe that the victory feels like a wound. Everywhere else the pattern holds. Assault. Failure. Withdrawal. Harassment. Roland Borsa conducts a defensive masterwork in Transylvania, channeling Mongol movements into corridors where ambushes wait and stone walls block every exit. Borsa has studied 1241. He knows the Mongol playbook, the feigned retreats designed to lure pursuers into traps, the flanking maneuvers that turn a victory into an encirclement, the exploitation of pursuit that killed 60,000 men at Mohi. He refuses to play. He never masses his forces for the pitched battle the Mongols crave. He never chases a retreating enemy. He never gives them a target. He hits. He hurts. He withdraws behind stone. He waits. He hits again. It is not glorious. It will not inspire epic poems or grand paintings. It is patient. It is cold. It is lethal. And it is exactly what Bela IV designed the system to do. By early 1286, Talabuga and Nogai managed to converge their battered forces outside the walls of Pest. If they can take the city, the campaign might yet be saved. One decisive blow. One major conquest to justify the blood and the frozen horses and the supply columns burning in mountain passes. Pest is no longer the open town the Mongols burned in 1241. Stone walls rise above the Danube. Crossbowmen-lined battlements that have been waiting for this exact moment for over 40 years. The garrison understands Mongol conquest. Some of them carry that understanding in their very blood, inherited from parents who survived the first invasion. They have trained on these walls. They have counted their bolts. They have studied the killing angles. They are not coming out. The walls hold. The city does not fall. And Talabuga and Nogai face a reality that no Mongol commander has ever faced in the century since Genghis Khan united the steppe tribes and launched them against the world. They have failed. Completely. Totally. Irreversibly. They can continue, besieging fortresses they cannot crack, losing men to ambushes they cannot prevent, watching their horses starve in snow they cannot escape, or they can withdraw. They withdraw. And the retreat is worse than the invasion. Talabuga's northern army pulls back through the Carpathian passes. Through the Verek Pass. The same mountains. The same snow. The same narrow roads Batik Khan rode in triumph 44 years ago. But now the roads belong to the defenders. Hungarian forces that held back during the invasion, preserving strength, waiting for exactly this moment, strike with full fury. Ambushes in narrow defile where cavalry cannot maneuver. Boulders rolled down slopes onto columns strung out along frozen roads. Rearguards cut apart. Baggage trains seized. Stragglers killed where they stumble. The careful discipline of the advance dissolves. Frostbitten men on dying horses stagger through passes that close around them like the jaws of something patient and stone-cold and final. The Verek Pass, gateway of Mongol triumph in 1241, becomes Talabuga's corridor of death in 1286. Same mountains. Same snow. Opposite graves. Nogai's southern withdrawal is more controlled, but no less costly. Every mile harassed. Every camp probed in the darkness. Every column shadowed by riders who know the ground and smell blood. And now Ladislas IV, the troubled king, the excommunicated half-Cuman whom Nogai believed too weak to matter, commits his royal forces to pursuit. Not the reckless pursuit that killed Hungarians at Mohi. Controlled. Methodical. Pressing the retreating Mongols the way a wolf pack presses wounded prey, never letting them rest, never letting them regroup, ensuring they pay for every league of their retreat in men and horses and the shattered remains of their belief that Hungary was ripe for conquest. 2 months. The entire invasion lasts 2 months. Against the year-long devastation of 1241, no major city has fallen. No decisive battle has destroyed Hungarian military power. No civilian population has been subjected to the systematic extermination that killed 250,000 souls 44 years before. The walls held. The people lived. The kingdom stood. For the first time since Genghis Khan united the steppe tribes and launched them against the edges of the known world, the first time in a century of conquest that had consumed empires from the Pacific to the Danube, a Mongol invasion force has failed. Completely. Totally. Driven back in humiliation by quarried limestone and the stubbornness of people who refused to die the same way twice. The unstoppable force met the immovable object. And for the first time in living memory, it was the force that shattered. But this triumph carries a hidden cost. A cost Bela knew was coming. A cost he accepted with open eyes 28 years before, when he signed the first decree permitting his nobles to build the walls that just saved his kingdom. Because every castle that stopped the Mongols is also a castle that can defy the king. And that truth is about to reshape Hungary in ways no fortress can prevent. The shockwave rolls east. Within the Golden Hoard, The recriminations begin before the last retreating column clears the Carpathian passes. Talabuga blames Nogai. Nogai blames Talabuga. Each accuses the other of cowardice, poor coordination, strategic blindness. The alliance that held long enough to launch the invasion does not survive its failure. By 1287, the accusations have curdled into open conflict. Talabuga seizes power in a coup. The Hoard fractures along the same lines that fracture every empire built on conquest when conquest fails, because victory is the only glue that holds such alliances together, and defeat dissolves it like salt in rain. The Mongols try again. Not Hungary, they have learned that lesson. In 1287 they strike Poland instead. They fail again. And this time, a Hungarian contingent fights alongside the Polish defenders. Georgy of Sovar leads them, carrying into battle the hard-won knowledge of how to break Mongol momentum against prepared positions. The knowledge transfers. The lesson spreads. What Bela built for Hungary becomes a template for an entire region. After 1285 and 1287, the Golden Horde never again mounts a major invasion of Central Europe. Never. The dream of riding west to the Atlantic, the dream Genghis Khan planted and Bada Khan carried to the banks of the Danube, dies in the Carpathian snows and against the walls of Hungarian castles. It dies not with a grand last battle but with the quiet finality of a door closing on a room no one will enter again. By 1345, the reversal is absolute. A Hungarian army under Count Andrew Lakfy crosses into Golden Horde territory, invades it, defeats a Mongol force in open battle on Mongol soil, seizes the region that will become Moldavia. The hunted have become the hunters. The prey has grown claws. But turn the stone over. Look at the other side. Every castle that stopped the Mongols is a center of independent power. Every baron who defended his own territory in 1285 has learned the deepest and most dangerous lesson a nobleman can learn, that he does not need the king to survive. The Borsas, the Abbas, the Baksas, the families that broke the Mongol invasion emerge from the crisis commanding private armies from fortresses that can defy royal authority as effectively as they defied the Golden Horde. They have tasted independence. They have held their own walls. They have won their own victories. And they will not give any of it back. When Ladislas IV is murdered in 1290, killed by Cuman assassins, a death as tangled as his life, the kingdom does not smoothly transfer power. It fractures. His successor, Andrew III, is the last of the ancient Arpad dynasty, and when Andrew dies in 1301, the bloodline that founded Hungary goes extinct. The throne sits empty. And into the vacuum pour the very magnates Bela empowered, fighting each other for the crown from behind the walls he paid them to build. 8 years of civil war. Noble against noble. Castle against castle. The tools of survival turned into instruments of ambition. The fortress state that stopped the Mongols becomes the arena where Hungary tears at its own flesh. It was the price of survival. And Bela knew it was coming. He had made the calculation in the ashes of 1242, with a clarity reserved for men who have lost everything and therefore see everything. A kingdom threatened by its own nobles is still a kingdom. It has courts and laws and the possibility of resolution. A kingdom consumed by Mongol fire is a graveyard. Graveyards do not recover. Graveyards do not negotiate. Graveyards do not produce future kings who resolve civil wars and reunite the nation, which is exactly what Charles I of Anjou did when he finally consolidated the throne in 1310 and began the slow work of curbing the very baronial power Bela had unleashed. Bela traded centralized authority for collective resilience. He sacrificed the power of the crown to preserve the existence of the nation. He chose a wound over a death. And when the test came, when the war cries rolled through the mountains and the banners of the Golden Horde rose above the passes and old men on new walls felt the ice of memory in their bones, his wound held where death would have been final. The guard who rang the bell in the winter of 1285 did not know he stood at the hinge point of continental history. He could not have known. He was not a strategist. He was not a king. He was a man on a wall with a frozen rope in his hand and a sound from the darkness that matched the sound in his oldest nightmares. But beneath his feet was stone that had not existed when those nightmares were born. Stone quarried from Hungarian hills by Hungarian hands. Mortared with Hungarian sweat and grief and the memory of what happens to a people caught without walls. Raised by a king who looked at the worst catastrophe in his nation's history and saw not an ending but an education. The Mongols came expecting the Hungary of 1241. fragile, breakable. They found a nation remade in stone and memory. A kingdom that had taken its greatest defeat and turned it into a defense the mightiest conquerors the world had ever known could not breach. The unstoppable force struck the immovable object. And it was the force that shattered. If this story stays with you, if you carry even one fragment of it forward, share it. Subscribe. Because these are the stories that remind us what ordinary people are capable of when they refuse to die the same way twice. Some defeats stay defeated. They lie in the ground and the grass grows over them and the world moves on. But some defeats rise from the ashes wearing armor forged in their own fire. They rebuild. They remember. They lay stone upon stone with the patience of people who know exactly what is coming and have decided, in their bones, in their blood, in the mortar between every block, that when the old darkness returns expecting the old weakness, it will find something new standing in its path. Something harder than grief, stronger than memory, patient as stone. This was dark history exhumed, where the past still bleeds.